An aircraft carrier is often seen as the ultimate symbol of naval power. Its massive size, long flight deck, and squadrons of fighter jets create an image of dominance that few weapons can match. When such a ship appears near a coastline, it sends a political and military message without firing a single shot. However, behind this intimidating appearance lies a fundamental weakness that has existed since the first carriers were launched. No matter how modern or advanced an aircraft carrier is, it remains one of the most vulnerable assets in naval warfare. The core problem is that an aircraft carrier cannot fight alone. Unlike a submarine or a smaller warship, a carrier's strength does not come from armor or raw firepower. Its real weapon is its aircraft, and those aircraft can only operate if the carrier is protected. To survive, a carrier requires an entire defensive bubble around it. This includes destroyers and cruisers for air defense, submarines for underwater protection, aircraft for early warning, and satellites for long-range detection. If even one layer of this system fails, the carrier's vulnerability increases dramatically. Size, which gives a carrier its presence, also makes it easy to detect. A ship stretching hundreds of meters across the ocean cannot hide easily. Modern sensors, satellites, and long-range surveillance systems can track its movement long before it enters a combat zone. Even older detection methods, such as radar reflections and radio signal analysis, can reveal its approximate position. Once detected, the carrier becomes a priority target because of the enormous strategic value it represents. Destroying or disabling a single carrier can shift the balance of power in an entire region. Another critical weakness is reaction time. Aircraft carriers are complex machines that require coordination between hundreds or thousands of crew members. Launching fighters, redirecting patrols, and adjusting defensive systems all take time. In a sudden, fast-moving attack, this complexity can work against the carrier. A smaller, simpler warship can react more quickly, while the carrier must manage multiple systems at once. This delay, even if it lasts only seconds or minutes, can be enough for an enemy strike to succeed. Carriers are also highly dependent on predictable operating patterns. Flight operations follow cycles, and during these cycles the carrier is especially exposed. When aircraft are landing or taking off, the deck is crowded with fuel, weapons, and personnel. Any successful hit during this moment can cause fires, explosions, and chaos. History has shown that carriers do not need to sink to be defeated. Damage to the flight deck alone can stop air operations entirely, turning the carrier into a powerless platform unable to project force. Modern technology has not eliminated these problems. In some ways, it has increased them. Advanced defense systems rely on software, sensors, and data networks that must function perfectly under stress. If electronic warfare, jamming, or deception disrupts these systems, the carrier's defensive bubble can collapse rapidly. What looks like strength on paper becomes fragility in real combat conditions. Ultimately, an aircraft carrier is a weapon designed to dominate when it controls the environment. It excels when it can operate freely, supported by intelligence, coordination, and secure communications. But in a contested, hostile environment, its size, dependence on escorts, and operational complexity turn into weaknesses. This is why even an older, well-handled warship, built with a focus on survival and disruption, can threaten a modern carrier. Power at sea is not just about what a ship carries on its deck, but about how well it can survive when everything starts to go wrong. During the Cold War, the U.S. Navy lived with the constant expectation that any conflict could instantly escalate into a large-scale, technology-shattering war. American warships of the 1970s were designed, trained, and operated under the assumption that satellites might be destroyed, communications jammed, and command structures disrupted within minutes. This mindset shaped a naval doctrine that emphasized survival, independence, and aggressive decision-making under uncertainty. Rather than relying on perfect information, crews were trained to fight effectively even when they were partially blind. Training during this era was relentless and unforgiving. Sailors were conditioned to operate with minimal guidance, often under radio silence, where even a single transmission could reveal a ship's position. Officers learned to make critical decisions without waiting for approval from higher command. This decentralized approach meant that when combat began, each ship could act as a thinking, adaptive weapon rather than a passive platform waiting for instructions. In contrast to modern centralized command systems, this doctrine encouraged initiative and speed, qualities that are decisive in naval warfare. American crews were also trained to expect deception. Radar contacts could be false, signals could be traps, and silence could be more dangerous than noise. As a result, they developed a deep understanding of passive detection. Instead of constantly emitting radar signals, which reveal a ship's location, they relied on listening, analyzing electronic emissions, radar reflections from other sources, and even subtle environmental clues. This ability to detect without being detected gave U.S. warships a critical edge, allowing them to choose when and how to engage. Ship design reflected this philosophy as well. Systems were built with redundancy and manual backups. If advanced electronics failed, crews could still operate weapons, navigate, and fight using older methods. Mechanical reliability was valued as much as technological sophistication. This meant that damage or electronic interference did not automatically remove a ship from the fight. The ship and its crew were expected to absorb punishment and continue operating under extreme conditions. This doctrine was not about elegance or efficiency, it was about endurance. The U.S. Navy expected to face an enemy that was equally powerful and equally determined. As a result, exercises were designed to be chaotic and stressful, simulating worst-case scenarios. Crews practiced fighting while tired, confused, and under pressure, because that was how real war would feel. By the time a real engagement occurred, these conditions were familiar rather than overwhelming. When compared to a modern aircraft carrier force that relies heavily on real-time data, centralized control, and constant connectivity, this older doctrine reveals its lasting value. A carrier group functions best when every sensor, network, and command link is operating smoothly. If those systems are disrupted, decision-making slows, and uncertainty spreads. The Cold War-era U.S. approach, by contrast, assumed disruption is the norm rather than the exception. The strength of this doctrine lies in its realism. It accepts that war is messy, information is incomplete, and mistakes are inevitable. By training sailors to operate in that reality, the U.S. Navy of the 1970s created crews capable of exploiting enemy hesitation and confusion. In a confrontation where modern systems are degraded or denied, this mindset can become a decisive advantage. It is a reminder that doctrine is not defined by technology alone, but by how people are trained to think and fight when technology fails. In naval warfare, there is a widespread myth that defeating an aircraft carrier requires sinking it. In reality, this belief misunderstands how carriers function and how wars at sea are actually decided. An aircraft carrier's true value lies not in its hull, but in its ability to launch, recover, and sustain air operations. Once that ability is interrupted, even temporarily, the carrier's combat power collapses. This is why a single successful hit can be enough to neutralize one of the most powerful warships ever built. The flight deck is the heart of an aircraft carrier. Every mission depends on it being clear, intact, and operational. Jets require precise conditions to take off and land, and even minor structural damage can shut down operations. A missile or bomb does not need to break the ship apart, it only needs to crater the deck, scatter debris, or ignite fires. Modern carriers carry large amounts of fuel, ammunition, and sensitive equipment on and below the deck. When these elements are exposed to heat and explosions, the danger multiplies rapidly. Fire is one of the greatest threats to a carrier. Aircraft fuel burns intensely, and when fires spread across a crowded deck filled with parked jets, weapons, and support vehicles, chaos follows. Crew members must focus on damage control instead of combat operations. Elevators stop, aircraft are trapped below deck, and smoke reduces visibility and coordination. Even if the fire is eventually contained, the carrier may be unable to resume flight operations for hours or days, which is an eternity in a fast-moving conflict. Another critical vulnerability is aircraft concentration. Unlike land-based airfields, a carrier's aircraft are packed into a small, confined space. This concentration makes them extremely vulnerable to damage. A single explosion can destroy or disable multiple aircraft at once. Losing aircraft on the deck not only reduces immediate combat capability, but also creates physical obstacles that prevent other planes from launching or landing. The carrier becomes a floating airfield blocked by its own wreckage. Damage to key support systems can be just as decisive. Aircraft carriers rely on complex networks of elevators, arresting gear, catapults, and power systems. These systems are essential for flight operations and are difficult to repair quickly at sea. A hit that disrupts even one of these components can halt operations entirely. While the ship itself may remain afloat and mobile, its role as a force projection platform is effectively over. Psychological impact also plays a major role. When a carrier is hit, the shock to the crew is enormous. Thousands of sailors suddenly shift from combat operations to survival mode. Alarms sound, compartments flood or burn, and command focuses on saving the ship rather than fighting the enemy. This loss of initiative can ripple through the entire carrier strike group, affecting escorts and air units that depend on the carrier for coordination and support. Historically, naval battles have shown that mission kill is often more important than total destruction. A carrier that cannot launch aircraft is no longer controlling the airspace around it. Without air cover, the entire strike group becomes more vulnerable to follow-on attacks. What was once the centerpiece of naval power becomes a liability that must be protected or withdrawn from the battle. This reality explains why adversaries do not need overwhelming firepower to challenge a carrier. Precision, timing, and understanding of carrier operations matter more than sheer numbers. A well-planned strike aimed at the flight deck during peak operations can achieve strategic results disproportionate to the effort involved. Ultimately, the aircraft carrier's greatest strength, its air wing, is also its greatest weakness. The moment that air wing is grounded, the carrier's influence disappears. This is why even a single successful hit, delivered at the right time and place, can neutralize a carrier and change the balance of power in a naval conflict without ever sinking the ship. Modern naval warfare is built on information. Sensors, satellites, data links, and command networks connect ships, aircraft, and headquarters into a single, constantly updated picture of the battlefield. For a modern aircraft carrier, this digital web is not just helpful, it is essential. Every decision, from launching aircraft to engaging incoming threats, depends on accurate, real-time data flowing without interruption. When that flow is disturbed, even the most advanced warship can quickly lose its edge. Over-reliance on networks creates a dangerous illusion of control. As long as screens are filled with clean tracks and confident symbols, commanders feel secure. But those displays are only as reliable as the systems feeding them. Electronic warfare can distort or delay information, turning clarity into confusion. Signals can be jammed, spoofed, or subtly manipulated so that false targets appear real and real threats disappear. In such an environment, the carrier group may still be powerful, but it is no longer fully aware, and awareness is everything at sea. Centralized command structures increase this vulnerability. Modern forces often depend on higher-level coordination to manage complex operations. Orders, targeting data, and threat assessments flow from centralized nodes. If those nodes are disrupted or destroyed, decision-making slows dramatically. Ships and aircraft hesitate, waiting for confirmation or updated instructions. Even a short delay can be fatal when missiles travel at supersonic speeds and engagement windows last only seconds. The problem is not just technical, but psychological. Crews trained in highly networked environments can become accustomed to certainty. When systems fail, uncertainty feels abnormal and paralyzing. Operators may second-guess their own observations if they do not match what the network shows. This hesitation can prevent timely action. In contrast, forces trained to expect imperfect information are more likely to trust their instincts and act decisively. Network dependence also creates predictability. Data-driven operations follow established patterns, surveillance cycles, communication bursts, and coordination routines. An experienced adversary can study these patterns and time disruptions for maximum effect. A brief but well-timed electronic attack during a critical moment, such as aircraft recovery or defensive repositioning, can create cascading failures across the entire carrier group. Another weakness lies in complexity. Modern systems are incredibly capable, but they are also layered and interdependent. A single failure can ripple outward, affecting multiple functions at once. A disrupted data link may not only affect targeting, but also air traffic control, identification systems, and threat warnings. Crews suddenly face multiple problems at the same time, increasing cognitive load and stress. In combat, this overload can lead to mistakes. Ironically, technological superiority can magnify these risks. When a force expects its systems to work flawlessly, it may invest less in alternative methods. Manual procedures, simplified tactics, and independent action can receive less emphasis in training. Over time, this creates a gap between what the force can do in ideal conditions and what it can do when conditions deteriorate. In a confrontation with an opponent that understands these vulnerabilities, network dependence becomes a strategic liability. The goal is not to destroy the carrier outright, but to degrade its awareness and coordination just enough to level the playing field. Once the digital advantage is reduced, the fight becomes about reaction time, discipline, and adaptability. This reality highlights a timeless truth of warfare: technology amplifies human capability, but it cannot replace it. When networks fail, the outcome depends on how well crews can operate without them. An aircraft carrier that loses its informational advantage may still be afloat, but without clear eyes and confident decisions, its power is sharply diminished. Weapons developed during the Cold War were shaped by a harsh reality: technology could not be trusted to survive the opening moments of a major war. Designers assumed that guidance systems might be jammed, sensors blinded, and communications severed without warning. As a result, American missiles of the 1970s were built with a simple but ruthless philosophy: once launched, they had to reach the target on their own. Speed, low-altitude flight, and destructive impact mattered more than constant updates or precision corrections. These weapons were designed to reduce dependence on external support. Many relied on inertial guidance, passive homing, or pre-programmed attack profiles that did not require continuous input from the launching ship. This meant that even if the firing platform was destroyed or forced to go silent, the missile would continue its mission. In a chaotic naval battle, this independence was a major advantage. The weapon did not care if the network collapsed; it followed physics and momentum toward its target. Speed was another defining feature. Cold War anti-ship missiles emphasized rapid closing time to limit an enemy's ability to react. Flying low over the sea, often just meters above the waves, they exploited the curvature of the earth and background clutter to remain hidden until the last possible moment. This tactic reduced detection range and compressed reaction windows. Defensive systems had very little time to identify, track, and intercept the incoming threat. Even today, these physical constraints remain unchanged. Modern defensive systems are sophisticated, but they are also highly automated and layered. They rely on sensors to classify threats, software to prioritize targets, and interceptors to engage them in sequence. Against a weapon that appears suddenly and travels fast, this complexity can work against the defender. If the system misclassifies the threat or delays engagement by even a fraction of a second, the opportunity to stop it may be lost. Another critical aspect of older weapons is their robustness. Cold War missiles were built to survive intense electronic interference. They were expected to fly through jamming, deception, and hostile environments without losing control. This made them less precise than modern weapons, but precision was not the primary goal. Against a large target like an aircraft carrier, near-miss accuracy was sufficient. The sheer kinetic energy and explosive payload ensured catastrophic damage even without pinpoint targeting. Modern weapons often aim for surgical precision, minimizing collateral damage and maximizing efficiency. While this is valuable in many scenarios, it can introduce vulnerabilities in high-intensity conflict. Precision-guided systems often depend on continuous updates, satellite navigation, or active radar guidance. If those inputs are disrupted, the weapon's effectiveness can degrade rapidly. In contrast, older fire-and-forget weapons remain largely unaffected by external disruption once launched. The psychological effect of these weapons should not be underestimated. Defenders facing a sudden, low-warning attack experience extreme stress. Automated systems may struggle, but human operators face even greater challenges. There is little time to think, reassess, or correct mistakes. The simplicity of the attacker's weapon becomes an advantage, overwhelming the defender's complex decision-making process. Importantly, these older missiles do not need to sink an aircraft carrier to succeed. A single hit on the flight deck, hangar, or fuel storage can halt flight operations entirely. Fires, debris, and damaged equipment can render the carrier combat ineffective for hours or days. In naval warfare, neutralizing a platform's function is often as decisive as destroying it. This contrast highlights a key lesson: effectiveness in war is not always about sophistication. Weapons designed to operate independently, exploit physical realities, and deliver decisive force can remain dangerous long after their technology is considered outdated. In the right circumstances, simplicity, speed, and resilience can outperform complexity, reminding modern navies that newer does not always mean deadlier. Naval warfare has always been shaped more by how forces think and train than by the age of their equipment. Technology changes, ships evolve, and weapons become more advanced, but the principles that decide victory at sea remain remarkably consistent. Discipline, doctrine, and adaptability often matter more than whether a platform is brand new or decades old. This is why a well-trained force using older systems can still pose a serious threat to a modern navy built around advanced technology. Doctrine defines how a navy expects to fight. It influences everything from ship design to crew training and decision-making under pressure. A doctrine built around resilience assumes that confusion, damage, and loss of communication are normal parts of battle. Crews trained under this mindset are mentally prepared to operate with incomplete information and to improvise when plans fall apart. They focus on maintaining combat effectiveness even when conditions are far from ideal. Training reinforces this doctrine through repetition and stress. When sailors repeatedly practice worst-case scenarios, chaos becomes familiar rather than overwhelming. They learn to trust their judgment, coordinate through simple methods, and act decisively without waiting for perfect clarity. This kind of training creates confidence that does not depend on technology alone. When systems fail, the crew does not freeze, they adapt. Modern navies often train for precision and efficiency, which are valuable in controlled environments. However, this can create a dependency on smooth information flow and reliable systems. When those systems degrade, the sudden gap between expectation and reality can be shocking. Crews may hesitate, seeking confirmation from networks or command centers that are no longer available. In combat, hesitation can be more dangerous than imperfect action. Experience also plays a critical role. Navies with a long tradition of independent command and decentralized decision-making tend to respond more quickly to unexpected threats. Junior officers and enlisted personnel are empowered to act within intent rather than waiting for explicit orders. This flexibility allows the force to exploit fleeting opportunities and respond to emerging dangers in real time. Another advantage of doctrine-driven forces is their ability to exploit enemy weaknesses. Understanding how an opponent thinks, trains, and operates allows commanders to target vulnerabilities that technology alone cannot fix. Disrupting decision-making, creating uncertainty, and forcing the enemy into unfamiliar situations can neutralize technological advantages. A force that relies heavily on complex systems is often more vulnerable to disruption than one built around simplicity and human judgment. History repeatedly confirms this lesson. Older platforms, when used creatively and aggressively, have achieved success against more advanced opponents. What mattered was not the age of the equipment, but how effectively it was employed. Crews who understood their systems deeply and trusted their training were able to fight above their weight. In the context of modern carrier warfare, this means that a technologically superior force is not automatically dominant. If its doctrine assumes continuous superiority and uninterrupted systems, it may struggle when those assumptions are challenged. An opponent with a doctrine focused on disruption, resilience, and adaptability can create conditions where modern advantages are reduced or negated. Ultimately, naval power is a human endeavor amplified by machines. Ships and weapons are tools, but doctrine determines how those tools are used, and training determines how well people use them under stress. When technology fails or conditions change, it is doctrine and training that decide whether a force collapses or continues to fight effectively. This enduring truth explains why age alone does not define strength at sea, and why thoughtful preparation can outweigh even the most advanced technology.